pilot's day starts with a bacon roll and a very thorough display briefing. Then it's time to get in the aircraft for the first display sequence of the day. Lee Proudfoot can usually be seen flying Spitfire Mark 9 MH434, but at the show he flew Mark 5 EP120.
And it flies beautifully, it's a wonderful airplane. Being a typical 5, light, brilliant aerobatic airplane, beautifully harmonised controls. You can't beat this. And it's certainly, after flying the 9 so much, you do notice the difference, and the boys must have enjoyed flying this airplane.
One of the many unique elements of Legends 2011 was the appearance of 3 Hispano Buchons. These were from the Aircraft Restoration Company, Air Fighter Academy and Richard Lake. They were flown by John Romaine, Cliff Spink and Charlie Brown. During this film, we'll be keeping the commentary to an absolute minimum so you can fully enjoy the glorious sounds of these piston-powered Warbirds. After the dramatic takeoff, the aircraft formed up for a stunning 11-ship low-level flypast. The Buchon is basically a Rolls-Royce Merlin-engined Messerschmitt Bf-109. In 1943, the Spanish government agreed to license 200 Bf-109Gs. To start with, 25 dismantled airframes were sent to Spain in 1943 as a pattern guide. However, Germany was unable to supply the remaining components and, by late 1944, Hispano decided to modify the airframes. After the war, the two-speed Rolls-Royce Merlin was fitted, and the first prototype flew its maiden flight on the 30th of December 1954. Next was a display by the Historic Aircraft Collection's Hurricane XII and a Spitfire Mark 1A. – 2011 saw the 75th anniversary of the first flight of the Spitfire. The Spitfire is probably the best-known fighter of World War II, and during the Battle of Britain, the aircraft became a symbol of hope for the public. The Spitfire had two types of engine during its lifetime. It started with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, an engine that many regard as the finest aircraft engine ever built. The later marks were powered by an evolution of the Merlin, the more powerful Rolls-Royce Griffon. Another three-ship next in the shape of three Skyraiders.
Well, it was made by Douglas. It was basically a dive bomber, although they later decided to call it an attack plane. And it's a AD-4NA. Oh, it was an excellent aircraft. It carried normally off the deck. launched from 625 feet, we would have somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 pounds of externally hung bombs. It was an excellent gun platform.
We had 2 squadrons of jets, 1 squadron of F4U Corsairs, and then 1 squadron of ADs.
And the jets always had to be catapulted. We were always mostly deck run, because Newton's law of physics is a body at rest will stay at rest. They didn't want the bombs to fall off the airplane and be left on the deck, right? That was very unpopular.
Well, after launch, you'd launch, of course, individually, and you'd join up with the other aircraft and proceed in and report into an air controller or somebody that was stationed on the beach, where they would direct you to the target if it was not a pre-assigned target. Frequently, you'd have a pre-assigned target, which meant to go into a certain point and destroy any supplies or anything like that that they had where it was available. And, the big thing in Korea was that you could always tell whether you were north or south of the bomb line, because north of it you saw nothing move. South of it, it looked like a supply dump.
Well, they had the heavy stuff that would be 12,000 feet down to about 8, and then you'd pick up the white puffs from the 80 millimeters, and then you get lower, and then that's the ground fire. You had 3 layers.
We joined John Beattie in the cockpit of Kennett Aviation's Skyraider, the actual aircraft that was flown by Mike Stanton in the Korean War.
Load, pretty much most of the missions, we carried one 2,000 pound bomb and 2 1,000 pound bombs, plus machine gun ammunition.
And in a mountainous area where they have caves and so forth, the 2,000 pound bomb, they really wanted it because of concussion. They actually tried to wound or kill the enemy by concussion. In the USA, we don't see very many Skyraiders because it was produced and delivered after World War II. So in the US, they don't classify it as a Warbird. So when they have a Warbird air show, it doesn't show up. I mean, it's just not considered one of them. We have little pockets of memory things back here, and seeing it go, it took all these little memory things and moved them forward right into right into our focus, and we started discussing various missions we were on and so forth, because we started remembering, and that jogged our memory. Okay.
The 2 other Skyraiders were from the Amical Jean-Baptiste Salis collection and Vega Team Skyraider Avignon. The naval theme continued next with the Fighter Collection's Grumman F8F Bearcat, flown by Pete Kinsey, and Vought F4U7 Corsair from Max Alpha Aviation, flown by Brian Smith. The Corsair was a rugged, powerful aircraft that featured a distinctive inverted gull wing. The aircraft proved more than a match for the Japanese Zero in the Pacific, and it would also prove to be an excellent fighter bomber, serving in this role during the Korean War and in the French colonial wars in Indochina and Algeria. The Bearcat was the final evolution of Grumman's piston-engine carrier-based fighters. The Bearcat was developed too late for operational service in World War II, but like the Corsair, it was used to great effect in combat in French Indochina by the French Air Force. Next up was the return of the Horsemen, Ed Shipley and Dan Friedkin in P51 Mustangs Fragile but Agile and February, both shipped from the USA just for the show. The last time the Horsemen were here, they flew 3 aircraft, but this year's display was a pair.
This year at Duxford, we're flying a 2-ship Horseman routine, which is kind of like the Coke classic of the Horsemen. And it's just going to be Dan and I. I'm going to fly lead. Dan's going to fly on the wing. And it's really just like the show that we used to do with Jim. And Jim's still a partner in the Horsemen. He's just taking a little time off to do some work. And it's a fun routine to do as a 2-ship because it's a wee bit sportier. You can yank on the planes a little bit more as lead. You don't have to worry about 2 guys. You just got to worry about 1 guy. And Dan does a spectacular job on the wing. I mean, you just sit there and you just see this huge prop just right off your wingtip, and it's awesome. So I like the 2-ship. It's fun. Duxford is it's a living memorial. I mean, it's if you go over to the museum, they have this great glass wall where they have an etching of every single airplane that got shot down in the war, and there's thousands of them. So these young kids that did all that great flying back then, a lot of them, as Mustang pilots and P-47 pilots, flew off this field. So if you fly Mustangs or you care about Mustangs or Spitfires or P-47s, this is the mecca of it. And to be here and fly over the field is, there's a lot of emotion to it. And Dan and I we fly off the hard runway. We don't really fly on the grass because we just kind of feel like that grass is sacred. And it's one of the things you'll notice if the Horsemen fly here, we don't really fly off the grass.
You'll notice that there is a strobing effect on the propellers of aircraft in our minicam shots. This is caused by the shutter of our high-definition cameras, which are now the size of a matchbox compared to the cameras of a few years ago. We think it's a small price to pay for the amazing footage these new cameras provide. So sit back and take a ride with the Horsemen. More Mustang action next with the P51 Tailchase, flown by Alistair Kay in Ferocious Frankie, Rob Davies in Big Beautiful Doll, George Perez in Nookie Bookie 4, and visiting New Zealander Keith Skilling in Miss Velma. The Mustangs were followed by an aircraft the P-51s would escort on bombing missions over Germany, the Boeing B-17. The B-17 was the first Boeing military aircraft with a flight deck instead of an open cockpit, and was armed with bombs and 5 .30 caliber machine guns mounted in clear blisters. Sally B is a G-model B-17 and is operated by B-17 Preservation with the help of a dedicated team of volunteers and the backing of one of the largest supporters clubs of its kind in the world. It was followed by another bomber, the mighty Avro Lancaster from the Battle of Britain Memorial Fight. PA-474 wears the markings of EE-139, the Phantom of the Ruhr, a ton-up Lancaster that flew her first 30 operations on No. 100 Squadron based at Waltham, before completing a further 91 ops on 550 Squadron at North Killingholme. She sports the letters of HRW of the ton on her port side and BQB of 550 on her starboard, effectively commemorating the crews of both squadrons. Now a formation that harks back to the golden age of flight, 3 de Havilland aircraft. They were the DH-89A Dragon Rapide from de Havilland Support, the DH-84 Dragon 1 from Norman Aeroplane Trust, and the debut appearance of DH-84 Dragon 1 from Aer Lingus. Then followed a Junkers Ju-52 from Lufthansa. The The Junkers Ju-52, nicknamed Iron Annie, was a German transport aircraft manufactured from 1932 to 1945. It saw both civilian and military service during the 1930s and 40s, and in a civilian role, it flew with over 12 air carriers, including Swissair and Lufthansa. A German type from World War I next, and Michael Carlson in his Fokker DR-1 replica, an aircraft made famous by Baron von Richthofen. Unlike many modern replicas, this aircraft has a 110 horsepower Lerone rotary engine, very similar to the type's original engine. Michael's display showed exactly what this early fighter was capable of. Another highlight of Legends next, with 4 Curtiss aircraft, 3 P-40s and a P-75 Hawk. Steve Hinton flew the latest aircraft to join the Fighter Collections fleet, a Rolls-Royce Merlin-engined P-40F Warhawk, painted in the stunning colours of the US 79th Fighter Group based in Italy. It was joined by the Fighter Collections' other P-40, this one a B model flown by Patrice Marchesson. There was also an N model from Christian Amara and flown by Mark Mathis. The final Fighter Collection Curtiss was a Hawk 75, flown by Alan Wade. Like the Mustangs, the P-40s performed a spectacular tailchase routine, while the predecessor of the P-40, the Hawk 75, flew a graceful display above. These engineers are starting the collection's Hawker Nimrod 1. It was joined by the Historic Aircraft Collection's Nimrod 2, the Old Warden-based Hawker Demon, and the Shuttleworth Collection's Hawker Hind, for a formation not seen at an airshow in recent times. In fact, it was almost certainly the first time such a formation had flown since the 1930s, an unforgettable symphony of Rolls-Royce Kestrel engines. Pete Kinsey flew the Fighter Collection's Nimrod, the Demon was flown by Stuart Goldspink, the Shuttleworth Collection Hind by Willie Hackett, and Charlie Brown flew the Historic Aircraft Collection's Nimrod. Next were two Hawker Furies, one from Mistral Warbirds flown by Frederick Ackery, and the other T20 version from the Fighter Collection flown by Nick Gray.
I'm flying the Hawker Sea Fury. In fact, it's a true Fury. It was built in 1948, first flown by Neville Duke. Then he was bought and sent to Iraq in 1949, spending at least 20 years over there, flying around 250 hours in the Iraqi Air Force. Then he was in the desert for nearly 25 years, and then he was sold in America in the end of the 70s. He was completely rebuilt in 1989, and then he spent 10 years in USA, and was sold in 2001 in South Africa to a very nice English guy over there, and I bought the aircraft in 2007. I was flying as an aerobatic pilot in the French team, and I love aerobatics. For me, I've heard in the past that the Sea Fury is the best aircraft to fly because it's a real aerobatic aircraft, and my goal was flying aerobatics with Warbirds, and so that's why I chose the Sea Fury.
This is a Hawker Sea Fury T20, which is a training model, and the difference with the Fighter is obviously you got second seat behind and dual control, slightly bigger tail, but other than that it's pretty much exactly the same as normal Sea Fury, which is the last piston engine fighter by Hawkers. So its great grandfather was the Hurricane, and after the Hurricane obviously you got the Typhoon and Tempest, and then the Fury, Sea Fury. the jets, and it flies pretty much like a jet. Everything's very automatic. It's incredibly smooth. Bristol Centaurus engine, sleeve valve engine. After takeoff, you put the gear up, you're still at full power, bring the propeller back to automatic, and then from then on, you don't touch it again. Everything is just handled, the injection, the fuel, the propeller, everything is automatic. It's actually a very easy airplane to fly. It's a lovely wing, it's pretty speedy, it's big, very, very strong. Great ailerons, the faster you go, the better they are.
It's very difficult because, in fact, I'm a rookie pilot in the Warbirds, so it's impossible for me to compare. But what I can say is fly like a jet. Very small displacement. It's a very, very precise aircraft. It's very nice to fly, very clean, very straight. So it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really carefree aircraft. I mean, you don't want it to run away from you, but it's great fun. It's not the same emotional feeling as in a Spitfire, for example, or something which did, fly in the Second World War and was bloodied. But just for pure emotion, speed, and adrenaline, and it's fantastic. Objective was to show the aeroplanes very high performance, so opposition showed different speeds, to be able to show that amazing penetration of the aircraft in the vertical. I was maneuvering mainly in the looping plane, he was doing mainly rolling maneuvers, vertical and horizontal. So it was to really show what the aircraft was made of. It's a high-speed dogfighter ground attack aircraft.
First of all, I tried to show the performance of this aircraft because this aircraft is absolutely fantastic. It's a jet aircraft with a prop. So I want to show the speed of the aircraft, and I want to show the performance, the roaring rate, and I would like to show that it's in fact a big aerobatic aircraft.
There was also a third Fury at the show, a T-20 from the Royal Naval Historic Flight flown by Chris Gotka. The Royal Navy Historic Flight also provided their Fairey Swordfish. During the Second World War, Swordfish aircraft accounted for the sinking of over 300,000 tons of Axis-powered shipping, more than any other single Allied aircraft type. The Swordfish and its brave crews made an enormous contribution towards the Allies winning the Battle of the Atlantic and gaining sea power supremacy in the Mediterranean. The Swordfish received the nickname Stringbag not because of its construction, but because of the seemingly endless variety of stores and equipment that the aircraft was cleared to carry. Crews likened the aircraft to a housewife's string shopping bag, which was common at the time. And a final salute from the crew there. These in-cockpit shots are taken from the Red Bull Corsair on its trip from Salzburg in Austria to the UK, alongside the collection's P38 Lightning, both making their debut in the UK. Many thanks to Matthias Dolderer for these shots. The Flying Bulls collection was founded in 1999.
Actually, it was started by our chief pilot, that was Sigi Angerer. He bought a Corsair, and later on Mr. Mateschitz, that's the founder of Red Bull, was involved into that topic. He was happy about the idea of collecting Warbirds and old aircrafts, and so the collection started. And now, we have about 30 aircrafts and museum, and actually we are going with the museum all over Europe. It was one of the last versions of the P38, so it's a L model, and was built in 1944 and was in service just until 1946. Then it was converted in a race plane, was racing at several air race locations, also in Reno, and was quite heavily modified for that. And it was called the White Lightning at the time and raced by Lefty Gardner. Actually, it was a race plane for basically 95% of its age, and so we tried to keep it in that state. So there are more streamlined cowlings on it, and also the wingspan was cut a little bit, and so it's a very fast airplane even today, and it's a delight to fly. It has hydraulic steering. Very, very beautiful airplane. Actually, at the beginning I thought it's a big airplane, so it's not that maneuverable as other smaller airplanes or fighters, but as soon as I went in and did my first flight, I saw it's a very, very maneuverable airplane. You could do really good shows, and you could do actually each kind of aerobatics, or nearly each kind of aerobatics with it. nevertheless, it's a unique airplane, so we are trying to keep the aerobatic level a little bit high. Yeah, we're doing a couple of vertical maneuvers, and actually we would like just to show the shape. It's a unique shape of the airplane. The P38 was also very fast, so we would like to show the first pass will be a very fast one, so doing about 350 to 370 knots, and also the sound of those Allison engines. I think people like it. Really a very nice thing to be here. So actually it's a dream. So I always dreamed about coming over here to Flying Legends, and yeah, this year we succeeded. We got the okay by our organization and by our boss, and he really appreciated coming here. And actually it has really a big history also for me, because I was at the age of 13 or 14, was very interested in Warbirds, came here, visited the museum, and B25 was starting up at that time. And since that time I had always that engine sound in my ears, and so I said if I grow up I would like to fly those airplanes. And I don't know how, but happened. And yeah, so yeah, it's really great to be here.
The P38 has distinctive twin booms and a single central nacelle containing the cockpit and armament. It was named Fork-tailed Devil by the Luftwaffe and 2 planes, 1 pilot by the Japanese. The P38 was used in a number of roles, including dive bombing, level bombing, ground attack, photo reconnaissance missions, and extensively as a long-range fighter escort when equipped with drop tanks under its wings. The P38 is unusually quiet for a fighter. The exhaust is muffled by the turbo superchargers. P38 was followed by Matthias Dolderer in the Corsair.
The Corsair, it's also built in 1944. It's also a 4 version, so a F4U4. It was used as a naval fighter in World War II, but didn't have a big history in the battlefield. It was basically used for training and did some landings on carriers, of course. But thereafter it went to South Africa and was performing there in El Salvador at the football war. So it has combat history, and it's also a very nice airplane, so quite maneuverable, not that fast than the P38, but of course also a delight to fly.
Back to World War I, and a recreation of a dogfight by John Day in another Fokker DR1 replica, and Rob Gold-Galliers in his Newport 17 replica. We joined them both in cockpit for a pilot's eye view of the sequence. shutter on our in-cockpit cameras had a very strange effect on the Newport's prop. Now, another unusual pairing, a Yak 9 UM and a Moran 406. The Moran was France's most important fighter during the opening stages of World War II. Although sturdy and highly manoeuvrable, it was underpowered and weakly armed when compared to its contemporaries. Most critically, it was outperformed by the Messerschmitt Bf 109E during the Battle of France. A pair of heavies next in the shape of two Douglas DC3 Dakotas. One, a regular visitor to Legends from Dakota, Norway, and a silver invasion-striped aircraft from Association Normandy in France, which was making its UK debut. They performed what can only be described as a Dakota tailchase. Finale at Legends is an amazing sight. More than 24 aircraft start up and taxi out for the legendary Balbo. Sit back and enjoy one of the most spectacular sights in warbird aviation.
Legends, it's a dream. It's really a dream, because here it's a small paradise with a lot of nice people, and you can meet maybe the best pilot, the best Warbird pilots in the world, coming from America, from England, from New Zealand. So for a rookie pilot like me, it's a paradise.
You can get a great view of how the formation comes together from our in-cockpit cameras in the Fury, Corsair, P38 and Skyraider. While this is going on, the boss of the fighter collection, Stephen Gray, keeps the crowd entertained with a spirited display in the Bearcat.
That was a great view, because actually we have been the last two airplanes, so the Corsair and the P38, and it was a great view. So it's fantastic to have those many airplanes in front of you, and I think it's just like World War II, but of course with a better feeling, and it was really important for us to participate at that Balbo.
After the Balbo, there is a final flyby by groups of aircraft. As each pass happens, some of the aircraft break off to land, while the rest of the formation goes round for another pass. This continues until the final pass by the lead formation and the final breaks of the day. this pass, the Skyraider and Mustang, Big Beautiful Doll, unfortunately collided in mid-air. Mustang pilot Rob Davies had a miraculous escape when he managed to deploy his parachute at low level and landed with only slight injuries. Sadly, the Mustang was destroyed. The Skyraider also managed to land despite having a large chunk of wing missing. Despite the ending, Flying Legends 2011 will still be remembered as another classic airshow, an event that would not be possible without the enormous efforts of Stephen Gray and all of the team at the Fighter Collection.